The story has to be told on green energy costs and who they impact the most. Our friend Dave Trabert, Kansas Policy Institute, has a great piece up at the Sentinel about this very issue. Research shows poor people are the hardest hit by green energy. Dave, good morning. It's great to have you on KCMO. Take us through this very obvious piece that many of us understand, but not enough people want to talk about. Good morning.
Well, good morning, Pete. It's good to be here. It's not that complicated. Everybody seems to understand that green energy costs, whether it's wind, solar, whatever, it raises the cost of electricity. It's more expensive to produce. And so if you have higher cost electricity, you're going to have higher utility rates. And people with low incomes spend a disproportionate larger share of their income on utilities than people who have more means. It's like sales tax. It's a regressive issue. If you want to support green energy, then say so. But you have to understand when you do it that you're harming the people you claim to support.
Mm-hmm. I'm not one of those who's against the idea, Dave, of alternative energies being a way of the future, but clearly it's not there because of what you're talking about. The cost is so much more expensive to the average person that having the federal government or state governments cram this down on energy companies is hurting working people and poor people. And until we get the cost to be neutral, this doesn't make any sense. What is happening at the state level and the federal level that continues to push these energy companies in this direction?
Well, first of all, listeners need to understand that utility companies don't make money from selling electricity. They make it from spending money. The more they spend, because they get a guaranteed rate of return. So the more they spend, they have to put in, we say we have to put in new transmission lines, we have to build more capacity, then it's going to cost more. And anybody who lives in Kansas knows what happened, because for a while, Kansas had a renewable energy policy that mandated utility companies get a certain percentage of their power from renewable sources. And so that increased the costs. And now we're going to start seeing it again. They need more capacity. So for the Panasonic plant is the most recent one. And now they want to raise rates on everyone. Well, everyone's going to pay. So it's another case of these things. There's always consequence. And in this case, it's higher utility costs.
Mm-hmm. Dave, when you look at just this issue from a federal level, I love the idea that people like John Kerry, who's burning more fossil fuels on his private jet than the average Kansan is in a year on one trip, and the folks who have beach homes, multi-million-dollar compounds on Martha's Vineyard, are telling everyday Kansans and Missourians that if you don't spend more money on alternative energy through your electric bill, then you don't care about climate change and you don't care about the global warming issues and things like that. And the hypocrisy to me, Dave, is so stark. How do we make that more of a conversation here in this? Or do you think that that's maybe an overblown thing that doesn't really address the main issue that you're talking about here?
Well, I think hypocrisy needs to be exposed, and because people have to understand where the folks they vote for, where they really stand. Look at something like school choice. Okay, so Brad Boyd, Democrat from Olathe, sits on the Olathe school board. He said he opposed school choice because it targets black and brown kids. Well, it does, but not in the way that he claimed. He thought they were going to be the victims. Research shows everywhere that black and brown kids, low-income kids, minorities in general, are the biggest beneficiaries of school choice because they're getting opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have, and the public education system is leaving them horribly behind. Like, only 13% of black kids in high school in Olathe are proficient in math, and more than half are below grade level. So which is it? It's basically just be honest. If you're going to say, I want to help poor people, but not if it means that I have to go against the system, because that's what matters most. Just be honest. Understand that when someone is telling you, here's my reason, test it. Do the substitution game. Well, what if it was this policy? What if it was that? Where are you? And understand where people are. And it's both parties, by the way. I mean, there's a Republican. What you and I've talked. Rob Olson finally voted against income tax relief because he said it didn't do enough for poor people. Well, that wasn't the reason. That was just an excuse. A lot of times you'll have people, politicians, who will most often vote for things like that they would say would help low-income people, but not if it means crossing the system. So there they have a preference more than a principle. And it's just everywhere.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Dave Trabert with the Kansas Policy Institute, doing great work there, joining us on a Tuesday on KCMO. At the state level, I know that you have folks like Mike Thompson in the Senate who really push back on the renewables and the cost of the renewables. There's not enough of that, as far as I can tell, happening in Topeka. Is there anything that the state legislature should be looking at specifically on the energy front to try to keep these costs as low as possible for everyday Kansans?
Yeah, one of the biggest things would be to allow Kansans to buy electricity anywhere in the country. Some states have that. It's kind of an open border policy on where you buy electricity. And then you can buy electricity other places that might be half the cost of what you're forced to pay in Kansas. In Kansas, we don't get choices. You have to buy from the provider for that area. And so it's a monopoly, and the monopoly is going to feed itself. That would be one of the biggest things. Another thing is with the Kansas Corporation Commission. The legislature is going to have to take a hard look at how that's done. Right now, we're getting things pushed through like a lot of the green energy stuff that's going through NextEra, where they're asking for eminent domain to take over farmland. Well, that's a 2-to-1 majority because those commissioners are appointed by, right now, Laura Kelly. And so the Kansas Corporation Commission is supposed to be looking out for taxpayers, but it's looking out for utility companies.
Geez, I didn't realize that. Dave Trabert's on KCMO Talk Radio. And is there anything the legislature can do on those appointments, or is that's just a governorship role and that's not going to change? And how long, do you know by chance how long those terms last?
That is something the legislature could do something about, and there's a number of ways it could be approached. One is on how, you could have those commissioners be elected, for example. I honestly don't know if that's feasible, but that's one way of getting you change how they get in office. Then they have to justify their work on behalf of the consumer. You could change and have different legislative oversight over what happens there. There's a lot of different ways that can happen, but until something changes, Kansans are going to continue to pay higher and higher electric costs, with the support of some people who profess to help low-income people.
It's unbelievable. The article, research shows poor people are the hardest hit by green energy costs. It's at the Sentinel, sentinelksmo.org. Great piece, Dave Trabert with the Kansas Policy Institute. It's always good to have him on the show on a Tuesday morning. Dave, you're the man. Always appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me.